Hey, it's Tim, Pickup Truck Plus, SUV Talks. Your first time on the channel? Welcome. How you doing? On this channel, you'll find truck and SUV news, reviews, interesting stories to do, and responses to questions you, the viewers, have. And one of the questions that keeps coming up in the comments is about trucks and some of the dependability stories I do, where I show a truck has had a problem for maybe a couple model years. And the response comes up that says, well, why don't they fix the problems with all their trucks before they launch a new truck? Why isn't that truck just completely perfect because they fixed all the past problems? And I can understand the frustration here, right? So you get a brand new truck, but it still has the same problem that happened 2 model years before. For example, I did a video yesterday looking at the first model year of a truck. So you buy the first model year. And one of the things I looked at was Ford had an issue with the brake master cylinder. Some said his vacuum, the recall I looked at said it was leaking. But anyways, we had an issue with the brake master cylinder. And it had gone on from I think it was 2015, 2016, 2017. And so it had gone for three years there, and they finally nipped it in the bud. And so the response was, well, why did they even launch a 2016 when they knew they had a problem with the 2015 model? And I understand the frustration. I mean, it's frustrating as a customer to get a truck that has a known issue at that point. And so I can see how that frustration come up. So instead of typing out, well, what would be like a 300-400 word response, I decided to do a video on it because, well, it's easier for me to talk than it is to type all day. And so the answer to that question is multifaceted. There's a lot of issues going on. And so let's start breaking these down. Let's first discuss how a truck comes to market. So my dad was a GM engineer, and well, he was with the quality control center. He was off the line. He wasn't technically an engineer, but he worked in quality control. And he was on the line. He did the building trucks. He worked through the whole process. And so I understand from him how this process worked. And I've talked to many different engineers of different brands at Ford and Ram and all kind of stuff. And it's basically all about the same. It's how these trucks are built. And so let's start with the truck. Let's start with, I was going to try to grab an example, but let's start with, say, the 2021 F-150. This is a good example. So 2021 F-150 has a team of, let's say, 3 or 4 top engineers, one from powertrain, one from suspension, one from vehicle dynamics performance. And those teams are working with a product planner, and they're working with accounting, and they're working with a chief engineer. And so the idea is that when the truck comes out, they gather all these ideas from consumers, from consumer groups, from study groups. They've kind of put together consumer focus groups, and they make this big plan on what they want with the 2021 model year and what new changes are going to be. And then they spend time working with accountants and things to see what they can do, what they can't do. They take the list, and the engineering works with the product suppliers. They go part suppliers, and they say, hey, can we do this? Can we not do this? So like the lay down seats were probably presented to them by a part supplier. And they said, well, hey, we want to try to do that. So they worked with part supplier to figure out how they could do it. They figured out cost. They figured out what's going to, how much engineering they put into research and development. And they went back to the product planners and said, it's something you think we need. And they said, yes. And so all these decisions get put together in this 2021. Now, the thing you don't know is that when that 2021 launched in July, it was probably ready to go in January. Engineering was probably done in October last year. And that engineering team, the team that worked on that truck, it's probably been done with engineering on last year. That team is probably transitioning now to work on what's next, the Ford Maverick, the compact truck that Ford's working on. And they'll probably go Ford Maverick, and then they'll probably go Ford Super Duty, will probably be next, and they'll probably go Ford F-150 next generation, the refresh. And so there's this whole cycle. And for example, I'll show you the Chevy guy. His name is Todd Hubbard. He's part of the vehicle performance engineering team with Chevy. And here's him and I on the trail in Arizona driving the Bison. And I'm interviewing him about this Bison. And then he transitioned to, here he's on the screen again. He's doing the GMC Hummer EV. And I can tell you, I can kind of gauge, I don't know for sure, but my best guess is that he's moved on from that project, and now he's working on the next generation of the Chevy Colorado and GMC Canyon. And it just kind of keeps going. And so these guys are constantly working on next generation. My dad mock-up would always have vehicles sitting in mock-up. They were 3-4 years out. 3-4 years, model years out. Those engineering teams are signing off on that well before that truck ever comes out. So what does that mean for fixing problems before they start? That means there's a separate team. There's a separate team that looks at problems that consumers have with the current truck, and they're working on fixing those issues. So, for example, if you go to a dealership and you have a problem with your truck, and the dealership can't resolve it, and they call in one of the regional guys, and he files a report. That regional report gets forwarded on to corporate, and corporate's got a group of engineers, a group, maybe like 1 or 2 guys. Like, you guys would be shocked to walk in an engineering building and see how few people there are. You know, the majority of employment at Ford, GM, and Ram, and all these companies, Toyota, is on the line, the assembly line. I remember walking into Toyota's, it's kind of a side thing, but I remember walking into Toyota's technical center in Michigan, and there was 2 Toyota Tacoma guys. That's it. And they sell a boatload of Toyota Tacomas every year. There's 2 guys. That team grows when the next generation comes out, and then it shrinks when that other generation gets launched. That's how these things go. This team's engineers they just have like hundreds of engineers working on this truck all the time. It just gets goes up and goes down as new truck coming out. So what happens then is it goes to regional, and then it goes to corporate, and then corporate looks at it and determines what the problem is, and they look at if it's a part issue, if it's a design issue, what's going on. Then they send a recall to fix it, depending on how big of a problem it is and whether they can figure out where the problem is at. Really nail it down. In most cases, you see these recalls happen, and it's a poor part. It's a faulty part that they determine. So, like in the case of brake booster, it was a master brake cylinder or vacuum, whatever your voice choice is there. The Ford 7.3 liter Godzilla that TFL has, it was a part supplier that had an issue with the plug, and so the engineering team at Ford got these regional reports. They looked at these regional reports. They identified them throughout the country were having all the same problem. They talked to their service techs. They went out and saw the trucks in the field. They determined it was those plug wires were causing the problem. Went back to the parts supplier. The parts supplier said, okay, well, maybe we have a quality problem right here. They identified where that problem was. They fixed it, and then the parts came out and were fixed. Now, what happens, though, and what gets people frustrated is the question is, when does that part become a problem, right? So, like, you look at like a 20, like in this case, 2017. 2017 came out, and you look back and go, God, you know, they knew they had a problem, that brake booster, and they didn't fix it. Ford was just stupid. That was stupid engineering, and they're just cutting corners again. Well, maybe they didn't know about it. You know, if you look at the situation, and if that brake booster doesn't fail until you hit 60 to 80,000 miles in a truck, well, if you put 12,000 miles a year on, or 12, say you drive 20,000 a year, that's 3 years of driving before you identify that part fails. And then you got to identify that part fails, and then you have to have enough reports of that part failing. It's not just the part fails. It's that you got to have a surge of reports from people in the field identifying this part consistently, time and time again. That's why if you go to NHTSA.gov, they put down mileage. They're always putting down mileage and stuff when those problems occur, because you got to identify not only a consistency of the part failing, you got to identify the consistency of the area, you got consistency of the mileage. You got to identify all these factors to really determine what the right fix is. Speaking of area, the Ford EcoBoost from 2012, 13, 14, somewhere in that range, had a problem with a charged air cooler would get humidity built up and suck the humidity in the engine, or condensation. It only happened for 360,000 trucks in the southeast part of the country. And so, this engineering team, the advanced engineering team, before they launched the vehicle, they're out driving in Colorado and Arizona and Florida. They're driving all over the country trying to identify these issues to see if they can nip them in the bud before they come out. But there are times they miss stuff, because you may have a really wet spring all of a sudden in Louisiana, and all of a sudden you have a problem with EcoBoost engines. So those are the things that happen. So it's not that they're not identifying and fixing the problems. They are fixing the problems, but they have an engineering team that looks backwards. Engineering team looks forward. So the forward team, they never really look backward at the problems, unless it's something really major, but they're always looking forward. They're always building the next generation above that. Once the truck launches, they're done. This next generation, they're working on the next project. They're not looking backwards. The backwards team, that's the customer care team, they're looking backwards to fix problems. And so they look back and they try to identify what the problem is. But it's typically not so much a design issue. It's typically a parts issue, a parts supplier issue. Something went wonky. They run these. They have They have specs they're trying to meet these parts at, and they're trying to get these parts at certain specs, and they're relying on part suppliers, and that's how trucks are built. You know, I always tell people all the time that a truck is a combination of parts from a variety of sources. That's what a truck is. So I think that there's always, like I said, there's always that thought saying, well, you know, if they knew it was a problem for all those years, why didn't they fix it? Well, they are fixing it, but the biggest thing to remember is, and especially if you're on the forums checking that stuff out, it's just because somebody complains on the forum doesn't mean anything. What you need, from Ford's perspective, and Chevy and GMC, all that stuff, you need those guys to stop complaining on the forums and instead go to dealer and log complaints to dealer. Because the more customers that log those complaints with a similar problem at the dealer, the better the fix is going to be. So, and the other thing too is you have to understand how widespread the problem is. You know, I find this all the time. I find that, you know, my buddy's cousin's uncle had his engine blew up on him. Okay, do you have an example of that times 1,000? Because if you can do it like by 1,000, then we really have a problem. But if I have a one-off thing, it's hard to fix that problem when it's a one-off thing. I've been to events and I've had fans come up to me and talk about stuff, and they're like, "Hey, did Chevy ever fix that? It was an issue with the tires on the heavy duties would go inverted, and they just would snap the axle ends or the tie rod ends." And I said to him, I said, "What are you talking about?" He's like, "Well," he goes, "I see videos all the time where the Chevy Silverado, the tie rods snap and the tires go inverted." I was like, "Well, send me a video." Well, he sends me a video of a Silverado Duramax at a tractor pull, pulling like 45,000 pounds or something, one of those big sleds. And it's snapping when it's going through the mud in a tractor pull. And the tie rod ends slap. And what I've learned is they make new sleeves that go on top to make them more heavy duty. He's like, "They need to fix that problem." I was like, "Well, what problem is it for that 5%, well, I mean 1% of the population that is exceeding the manufacturer recommendation for how much that truck can tow, and now they have a problem with their tie rod end snapping?" I'm like, that's where it all got to have some common sense has come in and says that, you know, just because you see it as a problem doesn't mean it's that big of an issue. That's why in the dependability videos I do, I look at recalls, I look at the number of problems. You know, I'm not looking at did 2 people have a problem with a door latch. I want 1,000 people that have a problem with door latch. I want a class action lawsuit. Then we have a problem. It's just that's how the development of vehicles works. So it's never about they don't want to fix a problem, because trust me, every manufacturer wants to fix a problem. They don't want to be known as a truck having an issue with it. That's not good for them. It's not good PR. It's not good marketing. It's not good. But that team that's doing new vehicles, not looking backwards. That's the gist. So hey, make sure you check this other video out over here. It's a good time too. Website down below. Text me or email me the questions or comment below. Let me know your other questions. I'll be happy to address them as best I can. As always, thanks for watching. I'll see you down the road.